Let's face it, parenting is the most important job on earth. Every day presents a stack of different challenges, and more often than not, the answer is outside of the box. On this podcast, we will offer proven strategies, interview pioneers in education, give insights into how to be successful parents, and even share our imperfect experiences of being parents ourselves. We're all in on this journey, and we will span the globe to find out what is working and who has the answers. This is the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast. Here are your hosts, Darren McCarthy and Brian Powers.
Welcome to the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast. I'm Brian Powers.
I'm Darren McCarthy.
And Darren, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this upcoming episode?
So today we have the pleasure of talking to Brenda Lana, owner of Pathfinders Learning. I met Brenda about a long time ago, in about early 2000s. And she and I were doing a lot of the similar trainings together because we were looking for outside the box strategies to help kids with learning challenges. And that world is kind of a small world, so you end up meeting similar people with similar minds. She started her Pathfinders in 1994, and she gives us a little bit of her history. She started out as a reading resource teacher, and you'll find that a lot of our guests started in the public system and kind of worked their way into the private world and felt like they were a little constricted. And in the private world, there's so many things that you can do and try and succeed and sometimes not be so successful. Sure. Brenda's not that one. She's the one that tries everything, and she'll do whatever it takes to help her kids. And you can hear her passion and really that she's the right person doing the right thing for the right people.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely hear that out of her frustration came kind of the business that she's running now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's you can tell that she's always trying to find a way to help her children get to the next level. There's one of the stories that she started to share, and we'll have Brenda on again, and she'll be able to kind of continue on. But everyone in we'll talk to will have those specific testimonials that really launch them into another world, and there's this kind of never give up attitude. And she had a student that had part of their brain actually had to be removed. And when you take away something so vital to us as a human being, you have to replace it with something else, and sometimes that something else is sheer and utter passion for finding something that will work. And Brenda certainly has that.
Sure. No, she kind of shares 3 tips, how important breathing is, and that, she even had a client that had their child work on doing some yoga, and it helps, really when controlling, impulses, if that is the case, for your child. I think breathing for anyone, not just children, all of us in general, I find myself not concentrating on my breathing all the time. It's definitely essential.
Well, and she talks about deep diaphragmatic breathing, which is taking it to another level. And weirdly enough, in the middle of that conversation, while she was talking about breathing, I found myself being more cognizant of my own pattern. And
Sure.
It's like, don't forget to breathe. Well, deep diaphragmatic breathing will not allow you to forget. It really kind of gets in there. It is a therapeutic technique.
Yeah. And then you guys focus a little bit on screen time, which is probably, I know it's an issue in my house. We're trying to manage it. Screen time, again, just like breathing for anyone, not just children, but for anyone needs to be managed. And she said, kind of use it as a reward for, getting chores done and doing things, having your kids help around the house and getting their homework done. Screen time should be more of a reward, not just a given.
Yeah, that ties in. Actually, one of our new blog posts came from Brenda, and she's talking about a reward system. Yeah. And a lot of this comes in, a student might come to someone like Brenda, who's based out of Southern California, for something like a reading challenge. But then the more she diagnosed, the more she kind of rolls up her sleeves, she realizes that maybe it's not truly a reading problem. Maybe it's an attentional issue. Maybe it's a behavioral pattern, but a lot of times the attention will lead to behavior. And then if you don't have those two, you're not going to be able to sit and read. And so she has this comprehensive approach, and she talks about, there's a time in there where we talk about bilateral integration, and we start to laugh a little bit. They use these fancy words, and to a parent, what the heck does it mean? And then you start to look it up, and you find yourself even more lost in the beginning. But basically, bilateral integration is getting both sides of the brain to communicate with each other, and it's a vital process. So in something like reading, it's starting on the right hand. You're starting on one side of the page, and you're working your way across the page. So it's visual motor, moving left to right. In some other languages, it's right to left. But getting that right to left movement, that's what bilateral integration is. And parents really don't need to know that much more than that for this conversation anyway.
Sure. No, I mean, look, I think we need to have her back. She talked about brain exercises and focus and attention. And then also not always, it's not always ADHD when there's attention issues or the child's having trouble learning, and we tend to whitewash or use one thing for all symptoms, and it isn't. She talks about auditory processing disorder and how again it's not always going to turn out, if the child's showing attention issues, not going to always turn out to be ADHD. Yeah,
and a lot of the times the symptoms look very similar.
Yeah.
And then so they get, parents get lost into a different pattern when it should be on the right side of the page instead of the left, so to speak. So, I mean, it was exciting. It was almost a reunion for the two of us. We haven't talked to each other in a while, to see how Brenda's doing and how she's taking on these challenges.
Cool.
And I think folks will find a lot of good information here. And obviously the show notes will highlight that on the back side as well.
Yeah, definitely. Show notes will be underneath the episode, and let's get to it. So,
all right, good stuff.
Darren and Brenda. All right.
I'm on the line with Brenda Lana, owner of Pathfinders and fellow educator. Brenda, how you doing?
I'm doing great this morning, Darren. How are you doing?
Fantastic. I do miss Southern California, but 20 degrees over here.
Oh man, it's beautiful weather out here, right? This is like this and spring are the best times of the year.
Fantastic. Well, we wanted to reach out to you to kind of check on how things are going at Pathfinders, how you got started, and how things have come along since '94 when you got things rolling.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about Pathfinders a little bit. And the way I got started is I was a teacher, and I taught in elementary school, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. I became real disillusioned because I saw kids in my classroom who were struggling, and I knew they were smart. But when I went to the learning specialist, they gave me the typical list of accommodations to try, which I had already been doing. And when I did my due diligence and went back and said, okay, what else can I do? They had no answers for me. They had nothing. They really had nothing to give me. So
and you were right in the middle of the core there, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. That's where we see a lot of students struggling, right? Yeah, it's important.
Exactly. They're very important grade levels because you're laying such a foundation.
Ironically, I have a 5th grader and a 3rd grader right now.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Well, then you know exactly what they have to be ready for in those grade levels. So
absolutely.
Anyway, I just felt like there has to be something that can be done. So I started looking for things, and as I started looking for things, I started finding strategies, techniques, different programs, and got connected with some different people that could help me learn and start to add some tools to my toolbox. And as I started learning things and started applying them, I started to see changes happen. Basically, the school said, you get them through the best you can. I'm like, this is a 5th grader who can't read, and that's basically what I was told. You just keep getting them through the best you can. And that's what we see today, I think, in a lot of our schools. I don't know about other areas of the country, but in California, we see a lot of kids that are graduating and cannot read. So,
my goodness. idea of, are you seeing mostly reading students or kind of a full battery of challenges?
We see a full range of challenges. Yes, reading is one of the basics, but also kids that are having trouble with, as well as adults. We work with adults as well as kids that are struggling with attention and focus, not unusual these days. Kids that are struggling with reading. Kids that are struggling with organization, executive function skills, can't do their homework but never turn it in. Take a test and don't read the directions carefully, so they miss the question because they left out part of it, those kinds of things. So we get a full range of students. We even have some kids. We just started with a little girl about a month ago that really didn't have much language, wasn't very verbal. She had some. And we don't typically work with those, but she'd been in speech and language for years. And within the last month, her mom just sat down and told me last week that she and her husband have seen more change in her in this last month than they have over the 7 years that they've been doing other treatments. And she's becoming verbal. She's using sentences that she never used before. So we work with all kinds of kids. I would say our typical kids are average to above average intelligence who are struggling, but they don't have any qualification for getting any extra help at school. So they kind of fall through the cracks.
Yeah, we used to call them, when we were working with the very similar, kind of child in Maryland, we would call them the kid on the brink of potential. So when you were working with this program that was kind of like Orton Gillingham, how did you find them? How did that come about?
Well, that came about because I was working in the public school system, and in the district that I was in, they used that as a remedial program for kids who were struggling with reading. So I had worked with it over and over and over again. I could do it in my sleep. I'd done it so many times,
Yeah.
And,
how long were you in the schools?
Let's see. I was 5 years in elementary, and then I was 2 years at the Orange County Department of Ed. I worked as a reading resource teacher there, and I worked in the alternative schools where I would go from site to site, working with the kids. Most of these kids these mostly were kids that had been in trouble in some way or another, or gotten kicked out of school for some reason, and most of those kids have learning problems. Mostly reading problems, and so I went from site to site and I trained the teachers in it, and then I went from site to site and helped them implement strategies and techniques to help the kids, or I helped them assess students sometimes. But that's kind of where I started, and so that was the reason I used that program with him, because I had seen it work with so many different kids, all ages, even high school students. So, and he had been told, this little boy, they'd been told his IQ was 40.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, they'd been told his IQ was 40, and you could just talk to him and tell his IQ was not 40, and once he got the system, once they get that sound symbol relationship and they start understanding the system, he just took off. And he ended up learning to read. He's an adult now, but he ended up learning to read, write, and understand at a 6th grade level, which is what most of our newspapers are. So he went from a 40 IQ to being able to read. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I mean, did you find that reading was kind of, obviously reading is, as they say, fundamental.
Absolutely.
But also, did you find that there were other challenges that kind of correlated to that? Where there's tremendous confidence that comes to that, and that kind of expands from there, right? Reading's the beginning. It's a hard beginning, but once that row is hoed, so to speak, there's so much more that it kind of invites, right?
Absolutely. It opens doors. And if they don't have that skill, it's hard to open doors, if they can't read. That makes a huge difference. So it made a huge difference.
So once you started working with the reading challenges, how did Pathfinders find its way? Well,
I just became more and more frustrated as a teacher, because as I continued teaching, I continued, of course, to see these kids in my classroom that were falling through the cracks nobody was doing anything about it. And so that's how I became motivated to do something about it. And I started out part-time and worked after school on Saturdays every summer using the techniques and the programs that I was familiar with to try to make changes. And after about, after 3 or 4 years, I started, I found a way for me to work at one place in the morning and then to do my students in the afternoon. And then in about 3 or 4 months, I was busy enough that I was able to just do it full time. And that was, I guess it took till 2005 for me to start that and to really leave. It was a big deal to leave the teaching job. You know, that's a steady, solid, stable income and retirement. But I was so frustrated. I had to do something. You know, I had to do something different. So
sounds like you don't know how to give up.
I don't give up. And I don't think any of us that work in this, you can't give up. And I don't put limits on them. You know, I really don't. I don't care what their IQ is for the most part. You know, yes, if they have severe developmental issues, you have to work with them a little differently. Your expectations are different, but you really still do the same kind of training that you do with someone who's got average intelligence. You still have to train the same types of skills, those underlying processing skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I've always said that, you know, if the programs work on more severe children, they're going to work on children on the brink of potential.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same kind of approach, right? It's a very formulaic approach. So it sounded like you started out with reading. Are you doing more like attentional and handwriting and things like that now?
Well, now, I mean, it's been so many years. I've just continued to add tools to my toolbox because I would get, you know, I think our kids always teach us so much. And when I would get a child that had some kind of issue that I'm like, okay, this is a little different. I need to do a little work on this. And I would research and talk to people that I knew or look for information and figure out how to help them, you know. And I think any of us that do that, we're learners and we're researchers, and we don't give up easily. We look for answers until we find an answer, you know.
Yeah, and that's the message for parents, right?
Exactly. Not to give up on things. Yeah.
There are answers out there. You just have to keep turning over some stones, right?
You do. And as a parent, if you don't advocate for your child, nobody else is going to usually. So a parent has to advocate for their child and not be afraid or timid about it, but be a nice squeaky wheel. That's what I say. Nice squeaky wheel.
That's a good way to put it.
You just keep going at it. You know, keep talking about the problem. Keep talking about the need that your child has, because that's our job as parents, right? To make sure our kids get the help they need and reach the potential that we know they have. You know.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who would be in the early stages. He's an oncologist now, but in the early stages of his career, he was saying how important it is to just keep asking questions, and just keep asking questions until you find the answer that seems intuitively to work. And it sounds like that's kind of what you built your career on.
It is
asking questions, and then if the answer didn't come, try something else. And that's a tribute to you and your care for your students and your passion for education.
Thank you. I love what I do. So
yeah, we can hear it. Absolutely. It's good that you're still involved. It's been 25 years now. Is that
it's been a long time. Yeah.
That's fantastic. How over the course of time, there's a lot of talk right now about attention.
Yeah.
And the tablets and families not eating together and everybody's kind of fly-by-night family situation. What are you seeing in your clinic regarding like attention specifically?
We have a lot of attention issues, and that is a big problem. And I do think our screen time does have an influence on that, and the fact that our kids are not outdoors doing things that are active. And
all right, yeah. So we were talking about attention and kind of what you've seen through the course, particularly now. We talked about tablets and how that all worked and how that's having an impact.
Yeah, I think tablets have an impact, and I think like kids are just not out and playing and moving enough. I was thinking about how I used to spin on a merry-go-round all the time. I love merry-go-rounds, but now they don't have anything like that. So what I think is interesting is that many times we take them to OT, an occupational therapist, and they spin in a swing that they have at the occupational therapist. Yeah. It's like we're having to go through therapy to do things that normally kids, if they were allowed to go out and play as much or be able to access those things, they would just automatically and naturally do what they need.
But I wanted to share this little story with you. Mm-hmm. We were up in Salem, Massachusetts a couple of weeks ago. And by the way, don't go there during Halloween. It's a mess.
Oh, I bet.
but we were up there, and they're doing a lot of construction. So there was a big dirt mound, big one. Mm-hmm. And my kids, of course, just, ran to the top.
Of course.
They ran to the top because that's, they're 10 and 8, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
And then they work their way back down magically. And the rest of that day, their tension was so, they're not normally tense kids, but they were so light and airy and laughing at everything, and they just kind of were so much them, they were so themselves. And it actually took me a while to figure out that they got some vestibular input.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you're absolutely right that going to therapy to get some degree of input. When I say vestibular input, parents are probably thinking, "What in the world does that mean?"
What is that?
So the attention deficit, hyperactivity, all of these challenges, and then you throw in auditory processing. It's a lot for a parent to kind of to oversee and kind of understand. Is there a couple of things that they can look for, and then we'll talk about some things that they can do?
Sure. I think kids are naturally active. So I think it's easy to jump to conclusions that they've got that problem. But if you have a teacher that's telling you over and over again about problems they're having in class, if you see that happening at home, if they don't pay attention to details, or they make a lot of careless mistakes, they can't stay focused when they play, or they're doing a task at home, they appear not to listen even though they're being talked to directly. Those kinds of things are things that parents can look for. Being easily distracted, having to run around and climb I think in situations that aren't appropriate, or in places where it's not appropriate. Those are key indicators that there could be something more going on than just what is a typical behavior of a young child or of children.
So some degree of impulsivity is normal for certain ages.
Of course.
When it becomes consistent. And then, so as far as if they start to see these things, is there anything they can do at home that kind of brain gym and vestibular input, things like that?
Making sure they stay off of screens, that is minimized as much as possible, or that they control that in some way. I think having the kids earn that time is a great way to do that, to let them earn the time, to use the screen. But that contributes to it because our world doesn't work the way the screen does sometimes. And so it's not quite as fast as that. And so it's hard for them. I think parents can teach them how to breathe. I think breathing is like such a very simple thing for them to do. And I mean deep diaphragmatic breathing from the diaphragm. Many of our kids don't know how to do deep breathing, and it takes, we end up training that a lot with our kids because they don't know how to breathe. And breathing slows the heart down, lowers the blood pressure. It really does help them refocus and kind of calm themselves down. So just working on breathing with them and teaching those things. I've had parents have good luck with teaching their kids yoga and helping them to be able to better control their impulses and better able to focus and pay attention. So I think those are some things that parents can do at home.
That's great.
If they really are concerned, of course, they can see a pediatrician. They have checklists that they can do. that helps kind of give them input as to whether or not this really could be an issue or it's something more typical.
No, it's interesting. You started talking. So we were talking about Brain Gym. Can you give a little bit of a review of that? Because we haven't talked about that yet with parents.
Yeah. Brain Gym is educational kinesthetics, and it's just using different exercises to activate different parts of the body and different areas of the brain. One of the things we use the most is doing exercises that cross the midline. So having both hemispheres of the brain, the corpus callosum connects the right and left brain, and doing exercises that help the right and left brain communicate just can make everything easier. It can make a huge difference. So we find those are things that parents can do very easily at home to help their child get through homework, to help them focus, to help them be able to get their energy up if that's what's needed. You know, sometimes they just don't have enough energy to do the task that they're being asked to do. So finding ways to help them increase that energy. So we use lots of movement using balance boards, balance beam, lots of exercises activities using the balance beam to help develop focus and attention and help them sustain focus and attention.
That's kind of part of their program, right? So they might come
Absolutely.
to see you for reading, or they might come to see you for something that's like more curriculum related, but they'll end up doing these other programs because it helps with the learning process. Is that the thinking?
Absolutely. If we just tackle the educational issue or the learning problem and forget it, we're a whole person, you know? We're not just learning. We have to impact that connection between our brain and our body is critical for things to really work together well. So we look at it as a whole and teach parents about that, because parents don't really understand either. You know, they think it's just a learning issue. Well, it's not always just that, and it's not that all by itself. So when we teach the parents to use these exercises too, and it's information that's available. I mean, they have books on Amazon that are very readily available, you know, to access for information. But the movement is really important to try to integrate or connect everything together.
So yeah, from what I remember, the Brain Gym book is about $10. You know, you're right.
Not expensive.
Very simple kind of activities, which is great. What's the significance of the balance board?
Well, the balance board, again, it brings you back to focus and attention, and then we do different activities. So they're trying to balance their weight on their feet evenly, to balance the weight of their body on their feet evenly while they're doing other activities. So we may add in a pendulum ball that's hanging from the ceiling, and they're tapping that ball in rhythm and alternating hands, or they may be tapping that ball and saying a sentence that they're reading from the board, or there may be arrows on a board that they're reading the direction of the arrows or the color of the arrows, or we may ask them to switch between color direction. So it's connecting that cognitive activity with their managing their body at the same time. So you're getting lots of what I call integration, just bringing it all together and making those connections strong so everything works together well.
Yeah, and I like the OTs use the word bilateral integration, which kind of pulls that whole thing together, and it translates from our good friend Gail used to talk about the importance of right-left movement with eye tracking when it comes to reading.
Yep.
So you're actually, that's the correlation, right? I mean, you're moving left to right, and then when you're on the balance board, you're moving left to right and kind of getting that body kind of in sync.
Right. And when you're doing those activities, you're also working on your vision as well. You're working on tracking. You're working on that right-left movement. Sometimes you're working on up-down movement. So there's so many things that are incorporated into that all at one time that are so critical for successful and easy learning. That's the goal, is to make it easy for these kids and people, to learn and work. It's not just about kids. There's a lot of adults that are struggling at work and don't understand why, and a lot of times it's these foundational pieces that are not pulled together for them.
Yeah, and it becomes a kind of to behavior, right? So with an adult's not paying attention to the child when they need their attention, it shows them that paying attention is kind of a positive behavior.
Right. Right.
and I think that's when the word is so common, and ADHD, ADD are so commonly used now, that I think there's confusion as to what it really looks like in the classroom. Can you give us a couple ideas of what to look for when it comes to, hey, my child's just a 10-year-old versus, hey, my child's, may have some attentional challenges that I need to look at?
Well, I think that our first thing, I think, unfortunately, and I'm kind of biased, I guess, but I think our teachers tend to jump at attention, or ADD or ADHD, and they think medication is going to solve everything. When they see kids that can't pay attention, that are off task on a regular basis, can't focus on what they need to get done, can't complete their work, those are things that teachers start looking at and can't inhibit or have poor impulse control. Those kinds of things are what show up and start the teachers thinking or looking at things as possibly being ADD or ADHD. I think it's important to get those underlying skills in place first, because you really don't know if it's truly ADD, ADHD, or is it another problem? Like auditory processing disorder can mimic ADHD or ADD, very much so. And I've seen that. I saw that in kids in my classroom. I remember one little girl in particular. She was in 5th grade with me, but she had gone through 1st through 5th grade, and they kept saying it was attention, and they finally did some testing on auditory processing. Sure enough, she had an auditory processing disorder. So her inability to pay attention, to listen, to follow directions, to engage in conversation in an organized way, all those were due to the problem that she had with processing what she was hearing auditorily. Not that she had a hearing problem, and that's another issue, is just understanding the difference with that. But
Absolutely.
It was difficulty being able to process what she was hearing. So it looked like attention, but it wasn't actually attention.
Yeah, and I guess that's because it's so, you start to get into kind of the labeling and how the system works with the school districts and so on and so forth, and that's definitely another conversation for another day.
Right.
But when it comes to, as a parent, it's hard enough to just, be a parent. And then it's hard enough to kind of be present. And then there's this other layer where it's observation. And I think what you're getting into there when you're talking about auditory processing versus attention is the behaviors look differently, don't they?
Not necessarily. I haven't found that to be true necessarily. I think sometimes the behaviors are different, but sometimes they can overlap and look the same. I really think it depends on whether you're talking about ADD, or which now we put everything under ADHD, but whether you're talking about hyperactivity or just talking about the inability to sustain attention or losing focus, being, daydreaming, those kinds of things, which has more to do with the non-hyperactivity. With hyperactivity, it's kids that just can't slow down. They appear not to listen even though they're being talked to directly. Those kinds of things are things that parents can look for. Being easily distracted, having to run around and climb I think in situations that aren't appropriate, or in places where it's not appropriate. Those are key indicators that there could be something more going on than just what is the typical behavior of a young child or of children.
So some degree of impulsivity is normal for certain ages.
Of course.
When it becomes consistent. And then, so as far as if they start to see these things, is there anything they can do at home that kind of brain gym and vestibular input, things like that? Making sure they stay off of screens, that is minimized as much as possible, or that they control that in some way. I think having the kids earn that time is a great way to do that, to let them earn the time, to use a screen. But that contributes to it because our world doesn't work the way the screen does sometimes. And so it's not quite as fast as that.
And so it's hard for them. I think parents can teach them how to breathe. I think breathing is like such a very simple thing for them to do. And I mean deep diaphragmatic breathing from the diaphragm. Many of our kids don't know how to do deep breathing. And it takes, we end up training that a lot with our kids because they don't know how to breathe. And breathing slows the heart down, lowers the blood pressure. It really does help them refocus and kind of calm themselves down. So just working on breathing with them and teaching those things. I've had parents have good luck with teaching their kids yoga and helping them to be able to better control their impulses and better able to focus and pay attention. So I think those are some things that parents can do at home.
That's great.
If they really are concerned, they can see a pediatrician. They have checklists that they can do that helps kind of give them input as to whether or not this really could be an issue or it's something more typical.
It's interesting. Brenda, I found that while you were talking about breathing, I started to be cognizant of my own breathing. And, it sounds such a simple thing, just, remember to breathe. And I think that's the world we're living in right now, is where we have to remember to do the important things.
It's so true. Yeah, it is. And we just...
I could talk to you all day about all of these things, and I would love to have you come back and, kind of continue some of these conversations. Can you give us an idea of where you are and how people can find you?
Sure, yeah. I would love to come back and talk with you more about things. I love sharing about this. So we're Pathfinders Learning in Rancho Santa Margarita, California. We're in Southern California, Southern Orange County. And, many people think that they just have to endure the frustration and pain of learning struggles. And it's great to be able to offer hope to people and tell them there are answers. There are things that can be done. They don't have to just live with it. Come visit us.
Fantastic. All right, good stuff. All right, we'll talk to you soon, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Darren. Bye.
Yeah, have a great one.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast with your hosts, Darren and Brian. Find them on social media at Sound Foundations for Parenting. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And we'll catch you next time on the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast.